I acknowledge Beyond Zero Emissions, their efforts with board and staff in beginning to make BZE a culturally safe organisation. And I particularly want to acknowledge the coal workers and coal communities in this region and observe that when people go unacknowledged, this can unintentionally imply that they don't matter. Innovation is such an important path ahead as it brings forward the leaders. It upskills all of us. And as a proud part of First Nations culture, I hope it may be a large, resilient part of Hunter Valley culture, using the skills of miners and community. And I'll be interested to hear from the panel about their future vision. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. This building is actually very significant to Beyond Zero Emissions. 10 years ago, in this building, Beyond Zero Emissions launched our first report, the Stationary Energy Plan, and that event was organised by the fabulous Sue Morley, who organised this event tonight. 5 years ago, I came to an event in this building, and it was the launch of BZE's Superpower report. Now, Superpower is just coming into its own at the moment. One of the first things that Superpower described was the transfer of capital from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And Superpower predicted that over 20 years, $28 trillion would move into the renewable sector. And this is happening as we speak. In 2020, the world committed a record $640 billion into renewables and clean technologies, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, Superpower highlighted that electrification will be the primary mechanism for decarbonisation. This creates huge opportunities for a country like Australia, and Superpower identified 3 export pathways. First was high voltage direct current interconnector to Southeast Asia, and that's already underway with SunPower. Second export opportunity is hydrogen, and the seeds of hydrogen are now being planted in the Hunter and other regions of Australia. And the third export pathway Superpower highlighted was energy-intensive industry. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. We're talking about launching the Hunter as a superpower in electrified manufacturing, and now is the time to do it. The Hunter has a long history of being plugged into global energy markets, but just a couple of days ago in Bloomberg's, I read that Japan has cancelled its last coal-fired power project. It's a 1.3 gigawatt project, and it will never be built. Japan now aims to reduce its emissions by 46% by 2030. And South Korea has recently announced it will no longer fund overseas coal projects. Combined, Japan and South Korea represent over 50% of our coal exports. To maintain the Hunter's position as a global energy hub in these rapidly changing conditions, it's critical that we change the way we export energy. Around the world, companies from BHP to Apple to IKEA are working to take the emissions out of their supply chains. And Hunter businesses have already recognised this opportunity. In Waratah, Molycop is the biggest buyer of Australian renewable energy, and they have done this to take emissions out of their supply chain. Energy Renaissance, who is here tonight, aims to produce batteries with emissions removed from the supply chain. Beyond Zero Emissions wants to ramp this up. We call our solution Renewable Energy Industrial Precincts. These are clusters of manufacturers powered by renewables with shared infrastructure resources like transmission lines, hydrogen electrolysers, and industrial heat networks. Our work this year aims to establish the national policy framework to see government support for critical early-stage infrastructure in targeted regions, and the Hunter is our #1 priority. We are using local input, your input, with expressions of interest and statements of support for renewable energy industrial precincts, and a big thank you to the companies that have already provided that support. We also need your data for our economic modelling, so we'd be really grateful to work with some local businesses on our economic employment modelling. Our preliminary results show that the precinct will attract over $7 billion in private investors, and we could double our manufacturing workforce, delivering over 20,000 new jobs in the Hunter. We have everything we need: rail, the port, electricity transmission. We have an amazing workforce. We have incredible research facilities, both here tonight at the University of Newcastle and the CSIRO, that both have deep industry ties and are really experienced at working with industry. We now have renewable energy zones all around us in New England, Orana, and the Hunter will be a renewable energy zones. And we have trade relationships with the new hydrogen economies, who incidentally are also big customers of Australian iron ore. Australian renewable energy needs to be embodied in our products, embodied in our steel, aluminium, mining equipment and batteries. Renewable Energy Industrial Precincts opens the door for a huge boom in local manufacturing, and we're ready to get it started. So, I'm going to start with Boris Novak from HunterNet, because the story of a HunterNet is very interesting and very relevant. It's a cooperative of over 200 companies formed in 1992 as the local economy was facing huge change. So Boris, can you tell us a bit about the HunterNet story?
Thanks, Anne. So it really was born out of necessity when the BHP provided notice that they were going to leave, and so with the pending exit of such a cornerstone player in terms of industry and manufacturing, some industry leaders got together and said, look, we need to use the power of many so that we can present a much broader and larger capability that we can't be ignored. So that's what they did, and HunterNet was created in 1992. So that was able to try and garner and capture more capabilities higher up in the tier of the supply chain. But the other thing that got born out of that was the absence of BHP in terms of training as well, where much of the people that worked in the supply chain were trained under that BHP umbrella. So then we saw organisations like our HunterNet group training born out of that, a few other group training organisations out there as well. So it was under times of need and times of change that really was the embryo for that.
Okay, got another question for you. As the market conditions are changing now, what do you think needs to happen here in the Hunter now to support diversification?
Well, we're probably being challenged again. It's a different kind of challenge. So we've got about, I think it's, the last time I saw was about 25,000 carbon workers throughout the greater Hunter. That's littered throughout the entire supply chain that supports that coal industry. And one could say that coal's fallen out of favour. It's probably not just losing the social licence, but it's also from the essentiality of that. With I'm pretty sure I saw NASA's Goddard Institute predict that we really need to stop producing carbon dioxide by about 2030, and that if we have a moratorium on coal-fired power stations, at least if they keep being produced, have carbon sequestering technologies. So we really do need to, so that it's the new challenge, which is to diversify, to be able to create new opportunities where those carbon workers have got other opportunities to actually find a bleak endeavour, if you will. Things like, you know, we've talked about hydrogen, you talked about battery manufacturing. It's like also offshore wind. Origination industries, other huge opportunities that we can really grow out of what has probably been an industry that's hijacked our consideration as to where we can go because it has been so enormous. But we really need to get going and start learning by doing and actually go with a more ground-up approach now.
Thanks, Boris. Alice, The Committee for the Hunter has done some great work to bring together stakeholders to upgrade major infrastructure like the airport and the multi-container terminal. Why would a clean manufacturing precinct be so good for your members?
Thanks for having me here today, Sam. As Boris explained, really the diversification and growth of the hunter economy certainly is a priority for the region. It's a priority for the committee, and it is a priority for the committee's members, many of which actually sit within or make up components of the coal supply chain. We also have a growing energy sector within our membership, Mark Chilcote, Energy Renaissance, Reclaim Energy, and really I think the ability for these businesses to grow and prosper in the hunter is everyone's business, so I've certainly made that my business. Now, the diversification and growth is a priority, and that's why the committee continues to advocate for the policy, the planning, the infrastructure that is certainly going to help grow local industries and businesses in areas of our competitive advantage. And that is, energy has certainly been identified, including by the New South Wales State Government, as one of these priority industries. We really need to build from our strong capabilities, the big guys and the small guys here. There's a lot of activity here. The Hunter has recently been designated a renewable energy zone, a RES, New South Wales state policy, a hydrogen technology cluster, which is a federal government policy. We are one of 2 New South Wales hydrogen hubs. The Minister Matt Keane announced that just over a month ago. And also the guidelines will be released soon for the Hunter to be a regional hydrogen export hub. That's actually a competitive national-wide program. So we can see that there's record levels of public funding, indeed private financing, to help industry reduce emissions and to prosper in a low-carbon economy. And it's really clear with this proliferation of activity, investments and interest in this area that if you want to capture the benefits of a clean economy, of Australia's energy and carbon transmission, the Hunter Valley certainly is the place to be. So now it's time to really move the conversation beyond saying what are the opportunities and the key focus areas really in a clean economy and and looking at green jobs, clean jobs. It's now time to look at the plan on how we actually create those jobs and to secure the partnerships that we need to get there. So that's why I always talk about the Committee for the Hunter being a thought leader, an advocate, but we're also a platform for collective action. And that's why we've got a bunch of our members together to talk about really a locally led Hunter Energy Industry Development Plan. Now, this is a really important distinction because both at the state and the federal level, we have plans for technology, for electricity, but we don't actually have plans inter alia it will do that, but we don't have the plan to grow the jobs and our competitive advantage to really be providing the products, the technologies and the services sitting around the world. So we've got our team together and basically said, individually, I think we will have better results for our component businesses, for our members and for the region if we work together on this. So we are now setting up towards that industry development plan. Now, what does it do? It sets the targets for employment and growth, and it identifies the barriers and the opportunities to achieving these. And we can just look around a corner and we know that these actions and investments are going to fall across levels of government, across portfolios within any level of government, across sectors, and certainly be stretched across the geography of the entire Greater Hunter region. So when we look at that kind of plan, precincts will certainly emerge as one of these important components of an industry development strategy. My background's largely been in the state and federal government, and precincts are increasingly being seen as a feature of both New South Wales and federal policy. We've got our special activation precincts, or our renewable energy zones, Newcastle's very own urban renewal program, and the light rail out here is an example of a precinct or a place-based approach to policy. They're coming back in vogue. Others with longer memories might also remember that they've really been applied as a concept, precincts, in regards to innovation. innovation clusters, innovation hubs and industry development. Now, why precincts? Well, they support the productivity and the innovation, which is essentially the agglomeration economics. I mean, what are the ingredients of innovation? I think it's pretty easy. You put a bunch of smart people together with that technology in a really close proximity and the sparks basically fly, and that's how innovations emerge. Precincts also support an integrated approach. Remember I said about all the things to build our local capacities and businesses in the energy sector are going to require that across the sectors, across the geography. So they support that integrated approach, cut across the silos and the sectors, and they can also help reduce the complexity of an integrated approach, which is really big, by just basically drawing a line around and reducing the scope of that complexity. So in summary, decarbonising residential and commercial sector, it's relatively simple with known technology. I think the challenge we have in Australia is how to decarbonise our industry, energy intensive, emissions intensive. Collaboration is key. It's what's setting the Hunter apart, including many of us working together on this panel in being successful for funding bids, certainly within government. And I think the Renewable Energy Industrial Precincts can provide a really good vehicle for this.
Thank you so much, Alice. Andrew, a totally different perspective now, the journey of a startup. Andrew's travelled all around the world, and 6 years ago he started a new company, SwitchDin. It's a huge success. And Andrew, tell us about your journey to becoming a global company.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having me here and the opportunity to support this event. So, I'm a Newcastle boy. I went to school, grew up in Toronto, Lake Macquarie, went to university here in Newcastle, started at BHP on the week after finishing school as a fitter and turner, moved to mechanical engineering, discovered the error of my ways, became an electrical engineer at Newcastle University. And that journey showed me a very different Newcastle than the one I discovered 8 years ago after living and working away overseas. That Newcastle was driven by a very different mandate. But the Newcastle that I came to discover had transformed. And all of a sudden it was a city of learning and youth and new ideas. And I just found that so exciting. So when it came to decide where I was going to found SwitchDin, it made perfect sense to do it here. So I guess part of my journey in founding SwitchDin, SwitchDin grew out of my experience working in about 15 different energy markets around the world. So I originally was an engineer helping to develop renewable energy projects in Australia and throughout the Pacific. Ended up working with NGOs and development organisations, bringing solar and batteries and biofuels into developing economies. Now, in those settings where grids are weak, this is actually the least cost option. And so in my experience at doing this and working with organisations like the UN and the World Bank, you soon start to realise the opportunities that come from these types of technologies and how they can liberate new economic activity. So returning to Australia and finding this amazing educated consumer, a very dynamic renewable energy sector with some of the cheapest renewable energy electricity in the world, but basically dumb business models. The barrier was around data and control. How do you coordinate and bring together all these different technologies and systems on people's roofs and in their businesses and in the electricity system? How do you coordinate them to work together? And that's the problem SwitchDin set out to solve. So in 2014, I convinced my wife to take some of the money out of our savings and together with some contractors, we built a prototype. And I used that prototype to raise my first capital. That capital came from the Hunter Angels, by and large. So my first seed investment was from a Newcastle-based angel investing group. And I can't sort of underpin the benefits of that start. And since then, we've grown. We're now 39 people. We launched in Europe in 2019, and this year we're going to see activity in North America. We would have done that sooner, but not for COVID. Along the way, some of the people that have helped us, well, to get started, we needed an office, and we had some offices lined up through a grant from the Newcastle Council. And we founded 1804 as a co-working space because we were looking for ways to bring people together. The office we had lined up fell through. Lo and behold, the CSIRO had some vacant offices. So they gave us a few vacant offices in their building. That provided us with some great networks. CSIRO gave us some of our first projects. The very first order we ever had, and I've still got the purchase order on my wall, came from Newcastle Council. Yeah? Lake Macquarie Council has also been a great supporter. Together, they gave us the opportunity to really validate our product. Since then, we've been able to bring together an amazing team. We have 39 people now working in Parry Street. Those people have come out of the Defence Hub up at Williamtown. They've come out of the resource sector. They've come from some of the software teams that are resident here in Newcastle. They've come out of CSIRO. So it's really been a fantastic place to build this sort of business. Yeah, great.
I've got one more question for you. What role would SwitchDin play in a renewable energy industrial precinct, do you think?
Yeah, so really the concept I think the BZE has brought to the table really completes the picture as far as we see. We've got state government initiatives around renewable energy zones, and I think the focus on bringing the clean consumer, but not just the consumer, the clean technology enabler to the table, really presents the region with an opportunity to further differentiate itself in the global market around this space. For SwitchDin, we want to be part of that. I feel like we've piloted the journey that local support and local communities focused around key differentiators can bring. So we want to be part of that, but we also have a product which can help. So we want to build, the product we're calling is SwitchDin Next Grid. We want to provide the software infrastructure that enables a new type of coordination between generation and consumers. One that empowers the homeowner with solar on their roof to participate in supplying energy to local industry in new ways. So we would like to be the technical enabler of a very new type of energy, of community energy empowerment.
Fantastic, thank you, Andrew. Jessica. Dr. Jessica Allen lives in the world of cutting-edge research at the University of Newcastle. So we've had quite a few university projects here tonight that are very exciting, including MGA thermal bricks that are now being commercialised and can have a central role in decarbonising industrial heat processes. Jessica, what other new technologies are in development that can help us with a renewable energy industrial precinct?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Sam, and great to be here with Beyond Zero Emissions and some amazing panellists. So some great examples of some energy technology related research that's coming out of the University of Newcastle are here tonight, including MGA thermal, diffuse energy are there. And these are examples of future-looking technologies. So when we're talking about renewable energy industrial precincts, we're moving past just electricity. And having electricity, really important. We can do that quite cheaply with solar and wind. And we can do it in a way, even though these resources are variable, if we use software such as what Andrew was talking about, it's predictable. And that's what we really need in industry. It doesn't necessarily have to be a base load type of power. It just needs to be predictable and manageable within an industry. So MGA Thermal have a really interesting technology as an example where they can take this electricity, maybe it's coming at a time where it's not useful for other providers, and they can turn that electricity into heat. And then that heat is stored so that it can be used by industry. Because industry doesn't just use electricity, they are moving more towards electrification, and there's a lot of talk of that with the increasing uptake of renewables. But it's not just about electricity, it's also about heat and process heat. And also the interesting thing about renewable energy industrial zones is about co-locating industries together. As a chemical engineer, I get a bit excited about it because you start to think about things like industrial ecology. So it's a little ecosystem of industries that are together, and you touched on that at the start of thinking about where everything fits in together. So the waste of one industry is an input or a feedstock to another industry, and that's using renewable energy that is reliable and predictable in a way that is highly efficient and highly integrated. So at the University of Newcastle, we have a number of different research streams and a lot of amazing researchers doing different things. And we're looking at things like next generation manufacturing. So solar photovoltaic panels, we've got a group there that are working on printing them. So making it an easy printable process that's cheap and also allows easy installation. We're working on things like green hydrogen. We've got some amazing groups like that of Badad Mogdaderi here today that are working on making green hydrogen efficiently and practically. This is a new industry. We need to do a lot more to develop that technology. We also have people using that hydrogen. So it's all well and good, we've got to make it, but then let's use it in something like industry. So Newcastle has this amazing history of steelworks, and I'm a Newcastle girl too. I've got lots of relatives that were in the steel industry here. So let's bring it back. Let's start making it in a way that's zero emission and use hydrogen that we've made from our renewable energy precincts. Also talking about future sustainable materials. So we've got Energy Renaissance that's coming in that's going to be doing battery manufacturing, which is fantastic. And we should also be thinking about the components of those batteries and where we're getting them from and making them as sustainable as we possibly can. Also some interesting work in making electrolysis technology more efficient. So when we talk about efficiency with electrolysis and making hydrogen, it's not really about emissions so much as how many solar panels are we going to need. And if we're making a lot of hydrogen, which we will need if we're making steel, then we're going to need a lot of land for that. So if we can change the electrolysis efficiency by even 1%, that's a massive saving. So all these sorts of different types of research and different types of technologies are going to be really important in the future. And the University of Newcastle is really invested in helping researchers to realise their potential as innovators. So in rolling out their research, not getting stuck in the lab and just publishing papers and getting more grants and publishing papers, but we want to start actually, this is a useful thing that could make the world a better place. Let's put it into action.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, it's a very exciting place, the University of Newcastle. And I'd just like to acknowledge Dr. Alan Broadfoot, who's here tonight from the Newcastle Institute of Energy and Resources, who's just so many people in that unit are here tonight. So thank you so much for coming. Warwick, the Hunter Jobs Alliance. The Hunter Jobs Alliance is advocating for the interests of workers and communities. What are the issues that workers and communities are facing in the Hunter right now?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Look, I think one thing that's really important to recognise when we're talking about the impacts on working people of changing energy systems is that these changes are coming on top of a lot of other challenges that people have in their working lives. At the end of the day, what are people looking for from their jobs and from their employment? They're looking for something secure, they're looking for something that makes them feel valued, and they're looking for something to build a life around. And we know that issues like offshoring, like casualisation, like the challenges we have with wage growth, are making people's lives difficult around these issues. And so I think it's really important to recognise that there are large parts of the community out there that could well be on a decent wicket at the moment in terms of the industry that they're working in and the money that they're making, but they may not necessarily have the same options. You know, I'd probably wager that most of us in the room tonight, you know, we probably have good educations, a fair bit of cultural and social capital. We probably all drink in wine bars. You know, I think there's a reality there about the access to opportunity and the ability of some parts of the community to manage change in their working lives. But there's a lot of people who don't necessarily have that same flexibility or adaptability, and I think that's important to recognise. The couple of other things I'd say is just the scale of change that we're facing. It is really hard to picture how rapidly or how big the changes may be, but you know, I think experience probably shows when you're seeing these kind of technological and investment shifts, things tend to snowball and then things happen in an unpredictable way. And I think, it's probably a little bit hyperbolic, but some of the changes that we're seeing happening in some of our core employing industries, it will be some of the biggest things that we've seen change since Europeans rocked up here 215 years ago in terms of what we do for a crust and how we support our society in the region. I think it's important to try and have a conversation about that. The last thing I'd say is it's important, I think, to recognise that we live in a big place. You know, we have 600,000 people here and a diversity of different experiences. So people are going to be at different stages in terms of how they're thinking about some of the economic change realities and the energy system change realities. If you're a coal miner in Muswellbrook and you're seeing a consistently tight labour market for the last 10 years and expensive rents and expensive house prices and 160 million tonnes of coal going out the heads here every year, then you're going to have a different view to somebody who's working at Tomago Aluminium who is having to turn the pots off a dozen times a month so that you can keep the lights on in Sydney and Wollongong and Newcastle. Or you're going to have a different view to an analyst who's looking at what Xi Jinping is saying about the 5-year plan in 2025 or what have you. And I think it's important to recognise that there is that diversity of opinion and we need to deal with it in a way that doesn't have a polarising effect on how we have the conversation.
Thanks, that's great, Warwick. What do you think a Renewable Energy Industrial Precinct could offer local workers and communities?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really challenging issue to think about in that we have to deal with multiple different parts of it at the same time. So we're dealing with the reality of trying to set a vision about what the region wants to be. We're trying to deal with some really crunchy, difficult structural change realities about people's working lives. There's tens of thousands of people who at some stage will see something different happen in their industries, and it's not an easy glide path for a lot of those people, and a lot of those people will have challenging circumstances. I think in terms of where things like renewable energy industrial precincts fit in, is that to be able to tackle those big picture realities, we need to be talking about real and tangible actions that we're going to be able to do to get us to where we need to get to. And I think the observations that you'd make about regions that have been through this type of thing is that we know there is a big long laundry list of things that can be done. They don't always work. A lot of them are hard yakka, and a lot of them happen around the margins, but we know what the list is, and I think our challenge here is that there is a race on across the whole world to be able to make use of the advantages they have. And, we all know what it says on the label for the Hunter region. We have skilled tradespeople, we have brilliant innovators, and we're seeing some of this here tonight. We have great infrastructure advantages, but, to be perfectly frank, there's probably 500 or 1,000 places around the world that have a similar set of advantages. And so our job here is to make ourselves the best at the things that happen around the margin. So putting a flag up and saying, a renewable energy industrial precinct is a way of demonstrating to the world that we want this here and we want people to come. We need things like the best investment attraction service that happens anywhere in Australia or the world, so that if companies are interested here, they can turn up and they know they're going to be supported through every step of the journey. And I think to some of Jess's comments as well, you know, we know we have challenges in our energy system at the moment for some of our existing big manufacturers in the region, and being able to come to grips with those challenges in a way that keeps those jobs and those opportunities here, but also then enables us to say to other people looking at the region, look, we can do this with 1,000 workers at Atomigo Aluminium, or we can support a Molycop, and so we can support you guys who are looking to come and invest in this region. And I think we just need to be focused on, yes, the vision, but also what are the practicalities and how do we be the best to be in it, to win it in that race that's happening globally.
Thank you so much, Warwick. So just, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to go through the panel one last time and ask everyone, what is the one thing we can do to get one step closer to creating a renewable energy industrial precinct here in the Hunter? So start with you, Alex, and then we'll just go through. Alice, sorry.
So I tend to agree with Warwick on the investment attraction. I think we've got a really good story to tell, and I just think it's about putting that in a way that invites, I think, others to come and play here. So, you know, it doesn't really take too much. It's a very practical step, but what it does need to be supported by is that backdoor system, that once they come in through the front door, how do we want to guide that? How do we roll out the red carpet? So we've got a really, really good story to tell. So I would say that certainly is key, but also what we're trying to get at with the industry development strategy is to really understand what our key strengths are relative to anyone else, and not just sit there and tell a better story, which we certainly can do today, but make sure that we've got that list, that we're knocking down the difference between a yes and a no, be it private, be it public investment. We're doing everything that we can to improve our value proposition, because we've got a lot to go on, but it certainly is a race, as Warwick described.
Thanks, Alice. Warwick?
Geez, I don't really know. That's a very difficult question, actually. I'd second that from Alice about, you know, what's the funnel? When people turn up and they're looking for these kind of opportunities around the world, how do they know that when they rock up in Newcastle, they're going to get somebody who's going to meet them at the airport and is going to drive them around and show them where are the sites, is going to give them all the information they need about what does our workforce look like, is going to tell them what the incentives are, they're going to be able to tell them who's who in the zoo. And I think we need those difference makers around the margin. How do we show that we really, really want this, and we are really, really keen to be able to attract and support those businesses? And for me, in terms of bang for buck, I think it is that type of approach that will make the difference for us.
Thanks, Warwick. Boris?
I'm going to struggle with just one as well. I'll go back to, we need to learn by doing. We need to actually get some demonstration projects up. Scale demonstration projects up, whether that's, a high end. The reason I say that is because they cost a lot of money, scale demonstration projects, but we need that to be able to immerse a broader cross-section of the supply chain into these endeavours, so we can start finding out where are the skills gaps, where are our, what's the new business development vernacular that we need to be able to compete on the global scene. How do we develop even as small as an element as competence in carbon accounting? That needs to be in our business DNA to be able to talk with overseas buyers and that. I guess to play on what Alice and Warwick have been talking about in funneling, and we basically need a licence to be able to make mistakes as well inside of that. There are overseas investors, there's a lot of foreign investment that wants to come here. They've already done a lot of this work overseas. They've done stuff over there. We probably need to put a bit of faith in the fact that they want to stick their necks out and actually go for it. But at the same time, we do probably need the policies to understand the rules around that. So I look forward to future legislation, for example, offshore energy legislation soon around that. But I guess the big thing is we cannot lose sight of is we need to keep working together. We have to keep the collaboration going. I believe here tonight that we're here tonight because of really at the end of a chain of wanting to work together, to set out to work together. We've been positioning the region here ready for investment, and but we need that to endure such that we don't have a hubris set in when we do start succeeding. Because what I've seen in businesses, the businesses that end up failing are the ones that, the problem is the up curve, because they don't keep wanting to innovate. They don't want to keep working together because they can think they can do it by themselves. I'm chuffed to hear Andrew, even with him succeeding now, that he's still getting out there with the little guys and everyone. We're working well with the university and all of the training organisations. We just absolutely have to keep working together and get better at doing that as well.
Thanks, Boris. Andrew.
I think, we've a lot of talk about an ecosystem. And if I'm a new player looking for where I'm going to set up my next venture, or if I'm a local company looking to transform the way we run our business and power our business and pitch our business, then being able to connect with that ecosystem can really accelerate my efforts. An immediate thing I think we could do is to start to tell the stories about what's already happening. I really believe that SwitchDin, for example, is a story how over 5 years we've connected with these different parts of the ecosystem to create 40 fantastic jobs, soon to be 80, soon to be 120, delivering services to the world. So I think those stories need to be told. So there is a lot of storytelling to be done. Now, businesses tell stories with data, and they make decisions with data. And I think we need to start articulating the value proposition, or at least providing the data that's going to enable new activities in this region to build their own stories. So those would be my two immediate things we can do.
Thanks, Andrew. Jessica.
Yeah, I agree with all of the panellists, but I think what I was thinking about when everyone was talking was let's show people what we can do. Let's show them what these renewable industry precincts can do. How about we start with the industries we already have here? So we have Tomago aluminium, we have Orica, we're making ammonia. Let's make green ammonia. Let's make it a demonstration so when people come to Newcastle to see what we can do, we can show them something tangible, because these precincts, they're going to take a while to develop. Technology and industry doesn't happen overnight. It's not a quick process. But if we have things in place already that we can retrofit and we show that we have a commitment there, then I think that could be a really attractive thing that could build momentum in that area. So I think if we're targeting already existing industries, that protects jobs and also shows what we can do and what we're capable of.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you to our panel. I'm actually not sure of the time. Do we have time for any questions? Okay. Do we have any questions?
Yeah. In Australia, we really need, levels of government to step in and help us in this campaign. So can we have the involvement of the politicians?
Can I hand this question to Alice?
Yeah, sure. So there is no doubt that when we're talking about collaboration, it really does start and end with all three levels of government pulling in the same direction in this space. But when I explained, what do we do to sell our value, to sell our stories much better about and celebrate what is happening to entice others to come in, but make sure we're working underneath the line of the things that improve that value proposition. Those actions, as I said, will certainly cross portfolios and three levels of government. So that starts to describe some of the inertia. If we say we need a plan, can someone take the lead? I mean, who do we want to take the lead? We do have a proliferation of policies and programs sitting really at now coming up to all three levels of government. I think our challenge is how to navigate our own businesses and external ones basically to come and be part of that. But I think we're all sitting here saying let's not stand back waiting for the leadership. It's certainly in our interest, and if we set that plan down, I'm pretty sure that we could do a whole lot of it ourselves. And then the conversations that we have with government aren't we're stuck and we're stuffed and we can't do anything unless you take the lead. It's come and partner with us. We need you to do this, this and this, because this is all about acceleration and scale. We'll make it no matter what, but the Hunter should not be mediocre, certainly not in terms of energy contribution in industry.
Can I have a quick go at that one too? Look, so I'd say there are, it's a really good question. I think there's a few interesting dynamics that we're looking at. You know, you look at the arc of history and where we are and people's trust in government to do things, and also the capacity of government to do things, you know, has diminished over time. And what we're asking them to do is to deal with fundamentally complex problems. And so I think we should be increasing our level of expectation about the capacity of government to deal with these issues. They are big challenges, and it's something that we should be asking for. I would also say too that you know, governments are only as good often as the expectations and permissions that we as a community provide for them. And if the Hunter as a community, you know, is deciding to spend its time with people in the community yelling and arguing with each other about these issues, then you're never going to see politicians stick their neck up. But by the same token, if you're seeing people in the community creating expectations about a different way to have these conversations, a less polarised way and a more practical way where we're showing what needs to be done and creating expectations, then we can start moving things. And so I think there are dynamics we need to pay attention to. We should be creating expectations and much greater expectations of our elected representatives, but we should also be leading ourselves as a community.
Thank you. I'd just like to add that the Lord Mayor of Newcastle sent her apologies. She couldn't make it tonight. She had another engagement. But the Newcastle Climate Action Plan does include a renewable energy industrial precinct type of project. So, you know, on the local government level, we're already on board. And we've already got a lot of great state government support, so we are getting those three layers of support happening. But yes, definitely I agree with Alice and Warwick to take the bull by the horns and lead ourselves. We have another question.
Hi, my name is Debbie O'Byrne. I'm the Circular Economy Lead at Lake Macquarie Council. And the question I want to ask is, how are we connecting this conversation to the global transition to a circular economy? So we know that China has adopted it as legislation in 2009. We know that the EU was using it as the foundational piece of its Green Deal. So my question is, how are we connecting that? And not just to policy, but also you look at a company like BlackRock, trillions of dollars in assets. They presented at the Circular Economy Conference in London a couple of years ago, and they have a firm plan to choose where and when they invest trillions of dollars based on circular economy initiatives. So clearly a renewable energy is a fundamental building block of a circular economy. So if that's now the operating system for the economy, where we've moved from linear to circular, how do we connect into those global pieces? We know that the race for cheap labour is ending, and the race for cheap carbon and low carbon is coming. So I'd be really keen to see how we're connecting to those conversations at a global scale.
Thanks. That's a great question, Debbie, and so relevant. And we do have some few people representing circular economy here in the Hunter tonight. Definitely, it is part of the Renewable Energy Industrial Precinct proposal that we have, and we'd definitely like to build more into it. And with some of the businesses that we've spoken to, they definitely have said a renewable energy industrial precinct must have a circular economy component. So we'd really like to talk to you more and work with you more on this, so that'd be great. Boris has actually suggested that we connect with you. I think, does anyone...
But I would just sort of reflect on the value that comes from meeting these global challenges locally. Because what you're talking about is a premium that businesses would get from relocating and being here. And I guess that same principle is core to the business model that's being proposed here around clean energy, clean industries. So I think there's a lot of synergies, and I think this is very much aligned with connecting with that global shift.
And there's certainly a lot of new and exciting technologies in that area that are coming along as well with circular economy. So MGA Thermal are a great example, using recycled materials in their bricks, and there's also a lot of work around waste reduction, but then using that waste in a sustainable way. And we've got companies on the Central Coast quite close to us, Licella, who are making plastics from plastics. So there's a lot of technology development that I think could also play a key role in circular economy.
And yeah, Molly Cobb is
I'm not sure there's a simple connection. I think there's many connections, and you know that, Debbie. I think that energy is just one subset of circular economy, where circular economy is really our journey to the goal of sustainability. It's not an end to itself, it's the means to the end. And there's many ways we can get there. We've seen many years ago the advent of biodiesel, which is a form of circular economy in the energy space, but also coming out of hospitality as well. So there's all sorts of connections all over the place. I'm not convinced there's a simple answer, sorry.
We've got time. One last question.
Hello, I've got the microphone, so I'm going to go. I'd just like to put a question to the panel, that we're making an assumption that people understand this new economy. And talking to a friend beside me here, not without being crude, I think it's a lot of engineering porn going on here. How do we communicate this wonderful new sector to our community to allow them to come along? Andrew, I know that you recruit local young graduates who can freely understand your industry, but how do we broaden that understanding so that their parents and that the community gets behind them, who are going to be, I guess, the talent and the power of this sector going forward?
I think part of the opportunity with renewables, a little bit more technical porn for a little bit more, hang on, so is that in many cases you can generate it where you use it. Now that has implications for how we own and govern these assets. That's why we can put solar panels on our roof, and we can take charge of a big part of the energy we consume. Now, there's a technical dimension, there's an economic dimension, but there's also there's a heartstring that pulls us into a community that's engaged in a bigger challenge. So I absolutely agree that at the core of making this work are the stories that we need to engage people with. And these are stories which are going to come out of how this impacts on every day they live. So what are the real jobs that are going to come out of this transition? Yeah, I mean, we've got people operating heavy machinery in the mines. Are they going to be able to operate heavy machinery in the renewables sector? Probably not. What does that mean for that transition in reality? So I think getting the stories right is about how we bring people along. And we need to be real, and we need to recognise that there are lofty ambitions to change the global situation, but these need to be manifest in local stories.
Was that Steve? Yeah, Newcastle Business Centre? Yeah. It's a great question, and there's no easy answer. I think I answered some of it tonight when I said we've just got to start learning by doing. It's not something that can necessarily be taught. We don't know what the skills gaps are until we start. We're not, in some areas, we're coming on from a baseline of not much in Australia. We may need to import that expertise to help educate the people here. But also, as I mentioned, having demonstration projects, something that's on site, something that's tangible, something where you can take a bunch of students doing STEM through to see what the future is for them, where they can get involved. Something where we might put some pilot floating infrastructure wind generator off, just a single one to get through the process, which the public can see and say, oh, what's this all about? To generate the intellectual inquiry that gets them interested, that actually starts to condition them to actually seeing it more often and getting used to it. Not that the end game would have that so close, because we're talking like 40 k's offshore, but getting the battery manufacturing plants up and operating, even if they're just interim, so that we can start taking people through, so that people can just start learning by actually seeing and doing. Like I said, there's no simple solution, but it's like Warwick said, it's hard.
Excuse me, Boris, can I add into this? We need artists as well. I totally agree with what you've said. I'm from the arts. I did a music and a dramatic arts degree in critical multiculturalism over at the Conservatorium. And case studies are a great way to communicate. And I think Andrew and Boris have both said tell stories. Case studies are something really powerful that came out of the biochar study that I just did with Beyond Zero and WPI. But arts, I think at the moment, are unsure how to come across and communicate sciences. I've got friends who are professional directors down in Melbourne. I worked with them when they worked for Tantrum Theatre here in Newcastle. They are for a better climate, but they don't necessarily know how to come across and communicate the sciences, or they're not sure they're needed here. So the Hunter Artists, we have a great arts festival in Newcastle. Being able to tell the stories of and the journeys, the difficulties of people like Andrew and innovators and coal miners. The blast-offs of the modern movie era, and telling all those stories of technology with all the sexiness of an innovation festival, but choosing the stories.
Yeah, and I'd want to echo that. I totally agree with the science communication is so crucial, and it's more important than ever. And I think people have seen now how important science is in their everyday lives through what we've just been through with COVID. So there's a lot more people listening to scientists now. So if we can learn how to communicate and in a way that, when you involve the arts, you have the beauty and you have the stories and you have the interest there, and it really engages people's attention more than just telling them facts about a certain technology. So I 100% agree.
I'd say the challenge in Australia, though, isn't about increasing awareness and understanding. I think we have that. It's really what I find interesting in the work that Warwick is doing. It's about how to unpick the resistance that has actually been unhelpfully helped along by politics to move forward constructively in this space.
Steve, I think it's a top question, and it's critical to the challenge. If we are, these things are not going to be done organically or by the market itself. We need governments, or we need coalitions of business interests or what have you to do things because the community is expecting it. And if lots of people don't understand what it is, then it's a really hard thing to do. And you look at the history of regions trying to grasp new opportunities or deal with big challenges, and 99% of them call the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff when things have already happened, and part of the challenge for us. There's no easy answer, I think. It's about understanding where people are at different stages of their understanding or recognition of the problem and speaking to them in the ways that they're going to be most familiar with. But it's about that long-term commitment to shifting the needle, increasing the level of recognition of a problem and the level of recognition that there are opportunities for us as well. But yeah, there's no easy answers, but it's critical to the whole show working and the opportunities being taken.
Okay, thank you to the panel, and thank you to everyone who came here tonight to have this really important conversation. I just want to say one of the big take-home messages I have tonight is to keep working together, keep collaborating, keep communicating. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to all our showcase. Thank you to all of the businesses and the researchers who came to show their innovations tonight. And thank you so much to our panel. Thank you to the Hunter Innovation Festival, Newcastle City Council, 1804, and I'm sure there's many others that I haven't thanked, but thank you everyone. Good night.